Yeah. Okay. Good advice there, Rick. Okay, we'll begin the class. We're lesson 99. Can you believe we've had 99 of these meetings and classes? And so we're probably going to go a little bit over 100. I don't know what the exact number will be, but we've got just a couple left before we finish this book finally. So overall we've got a pretty thorough course recorded on Treatise on White Magic. The section we're going into now is what he calls a call to service. In other words, he's kind of wrapping this whole thing up with a call to service that once a person learns the principles of manifestation, of white magic, of staying in the light, of focusing in the right direction, then he must use what he's learned in the service of the whole rather than the part. And this is the great lesson behind the whole course, is for the disciple needs to, instead of putting all his attention on his own personal progression, on his own desires and on his own needs, on his own wants, to see, to use his resources to help the whole rather than the part, to help the group rather than the individual, to help the whole planet rather than just one group also. So the Father, the more advanced an entity becomes, the more group conscious he becomes, and the bigger the group he embraces. So in other words, as we begin our progression, we kind of take care of our own needs. We learn to be self-reliant, take care of self, and then eventually we learn to, we get married, have families, we concerned with our family, and this family association causes us to begin to learn to think outside of ourselves. Raised little kids are so sweet, and it makes us think of people other than ourselves. And then we stretch beyond our family to other people. We join groups, associations, and other people have problems that need solved, when we start thinking of other people than just ourselves. And as the person evolves, his ring past knot expands. So eventually he gets involved in various groups, and then eventually he gets involved in maybe a spiritual group, and then the intensity of the interplay becomes stronger. He begins to identify more with the group that he's in, and then he begins to be interested in things maybe outside of his group, or a group of groups, and then maybe a state or a nation, and eventually the world as a whole. And this is where the masters come in. Is the masters' consciousness embraces the whole world. They want to see what's best for the whole planet. And then once the person reaches a point beyond being a master, he embraces a consciousness that goes even beyond this planet to eventually the entire solar system, and then eventually groups of solar systems and so on. So we all have a ring past knot for our consciousness, how far out we want to include. And so all of us as human beings have to do a certain amount to take care of our own individual needs. There's no way around that. We all have to go make money, go buy groceries, go cook for ourselves or whatever. We got to take a certain, put a certain amount of energy into the individual, but the consciousness of the disciple is constantly expanding to include and produce benefits for those outside of the individual self. So he looks upon taking care of his own needs just to, as he is one out of many, and he has to take care of the one because that's who he can take care of, so that he's healthy and vital, so he can be of usefulness to the many. And this is important. He says in closing this treatise, he seeks to do two things. One, indicate the immediate goal for students in this century and summarize the steps that they must take. Okay, the hierarchy has several, always has a number of goals for humanity. Now, we as individuals have goals, and oftentimes our goals are too much centered just on ourselves as individuals. We must tune in to the next step humanity must take and be a part of that step. And this is an important thing for disciples to take in. He says, second, he says, indicate the things which must be eliminated and overcome, and the penalties which overtake the probationer and the disciple when mistakes are made and faults are condoned. The immediate goal must be well recognized if lost effort is to be avoided and real progress to be achieved. So there's certain things that must be eliminated and overcome, and the disciples. And we, the problem with many well-meaning disciples is we spend a lot of time on unnecessary things that could be spent on moving the work ahead, so that we as humanity can move more successfully into the new age. The big problem we have right now, interestingly, is this virus producing a tremendous worldwide fear that is causing all kinds of problems, and financial. It's going to continue to cause financial problems for some time. A lot of people are going to be out of work if they can't. I mean, how many people are involved in sports, entertainment, that may not be working for some time and may suffer financially that way? The stock market, it went up significantly Friday, but who knows if it's going to stay up. So we're going to have...
There is one teaching that I think it has certain credibility, that the system as it is has to collapse before it can be healed and be brought into the new age. There's too much greed and too much personal interest, and most things that people are interested in are totally empty and meaningless, and it has to collapse before it can be healed.
Yeah, and one thing this can do for us, this situation the world is in, it's forcing a lot of people to focus on what's important in their own lives and shift their attention away from being entertained to maybe what's important in life. Maybe that's part of the lesson that we're supposed to learn from it. But everything that happens to humanity, we have to look at, it's produced by the world soul, so to speak. So there's always some lesson in events that transpire. So there's a lesson in this virus and humanity's reaction to it. So we have to look at that and see what it is we're supposed to learn and what we're supposed to do as disciples. Big obstacle getting in the way is the desires of the ego, either a false feeling of self-importance or a lack thereof. The disciple must tune in to the higher will rather than his own ego, or his work may be for nothing. So even though the disciple gets a long way, learns a lot of these lessons and information that DK is teaching here, if he's always got that ego, that feeling of self-importance. This is always a big problem, and there's many people that are very substantial teachers, get a big following, that uh, have their ego get in the way, and that's always something that we have to watch. The disciple, like they say, if you want freedom, demands eternal vigilance. Well, if you want to be free from the ego and its power to interrupt the soul, it also requires eternal vigilance as long as we're here upon the earth, where we're separated from our solar angels. So the disciple must tune in to the Aquarian influences. And he says they actually began in the year 1640. And the power of the Aquarian influences has increased ever since. Yeah, you look at the world up until the year 1640, you know, the progression was really slow. We didn't, almost all the major inventions that have taken place has taken place since that time. Has been a number of things that happened before then, but um, after that time period, from that time period till now, especially in the past 100 years, it's amazing what's happened in the past 100 years. But
Francis Bacon was a very important part of that era of 1640. He was the one who was the initiator of the scientific method. He was the one who wrote the essay called The New Atlantis, which is about this country. There's a lot that can be gained from the study of Francis Bacon's essays.
what years did he live? Do you remember?
Well, he lived from about 1625 to some 60 some years later, but no one ever found a burying place. No one ever has a record of his death.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm sure there's him and several masters showed up to try to stimulate the Aquarian age. Now, the interesting thing about the transition of the ages was it takes hundreds of years for the total transition to take place, and the symbol of the Aquarian age was actually given in the time of Jesus. For the Last Supper, he said, find the person carrying the water vessel or whatever, and he will lead you to the room of the Last Supper. And that person carrying the water vessel was a symbol of the Aquarian age. So the first symbol of the Aquarian age manifested at the Last Supper at the beginning of the Piscean age, actually. And then it became, the energies began to manifest around 1640. And I believe we reached in the transition at the time the first atomic bomb went off. I think that was the signal that the Aquarian age we're right in the middle of the transition. Now, the middle of the transition then happened in 1945, but it's going to take a couple hundred years after that to get fully into the Aquarian age. And as we're moving into the Aquarian age, the old energies of Pisces keeps trying to pull us back into the old ways of doing things. What do you see as the energies trying to pull us back? What are the Piscean energies that's trying to keep us from moving into the Age of Aquarius? Let's
There's
get
a
some
lot of
comment
them.
on that.
One is Jesus this, Jesus that, and then most of the born again Christians have a symbol of the fish on their bumper, and it's pointing to the left, which indicates the
The
past.
past, yeah, good
So
point.
they're moving, they want to hold us into the past, even in the symbols on the bumpers of their cars, and that only salvation comes from Jesus in some warped idea of how it's going to happen.
How about the New Agers? Are they fully into Aquarian energies, or do they suffer from Piscean energies also?
The light of Pisces still hasn't totally eliminated from any of us.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So
also the idea of go with your feelings instead of your thoughts.
right. That's one of the things that a lot of New Agers are saying. Yeah, go with your feelings. They say do away with mind. Thinking is bad. A lot of them are going in that direction, whereas the Aquarian energies is ruled by mind, and the Piscean energies is ruled by feeling. So uh, those that put attention on feeling, whether they be Christian, New Agers, or whatever, are putting attention on the Piscean energies, because mind is going to dominate in the age of Aquarius. Does that mean we're not going to be feeling creatures anymore? What does that mean?
Many
What are
of the
we going to do with our feelings?
many of the Piscean age people made the teachings a personality cult instead of really paying attention to the message. You know, that's I don't care if it rains or freezes as long as I got my plastic Jesus on the dashboard of my car.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, that's what Capricorn is all about, climbing the mountain where you have to let go of any external source to save you. You know, that's just not going to happen unless it stimulates your own soul to save you. That's about it.
Right. The important point to realize is that each age has its benefits and things that we're supposed to take with us. For instance, the keynote of the Piscean age is sacrifice. So does this mean that we're not supposed to sacrifice anymore since we're moving into the new age? No, it doesn't. But it means we're supposed to take the lesson of sacrifice, but it's no longer the keynote. The keynote is switching from sacrifice to service.
Service.
So if we're stuck in the Piscean age, we're willing to sacrifice and not get any benefit until we supposedly go to heaven or the next world or the fifth dimension or whatever. And that's the wrong attitude. But that was the attitude of the Piscean age, taught sacrifice any way that we could learn it, because we were so dense, we had to learn it any way we can. And now that we've learned it, we're supposed to take the lesson of sacrifice and apply it intelligently, realizing that there is really no sacrifice, because if we give something in sacrifice, there's always something that we get back. And that's what they didn't realize in the age of Pisces. In the age of Pisces, they give their lives, their fortune, their money, their allegiance, and they weren't supposed to even get anything back. And people pay their tithes to the church and it's just gone. Okay, but in the Aquarian age, there's a realization about the principle of sacrifice, that there is no sacrifice, that when you give, you get. The giving and like the Course in Miracles says, giving and receiving is the same. So it's an interesting point. So the same thing with feelings. The emotions aren't bad. They're really good, but they need to be used intelligently by the mind. So the emotions in the Aquarian age will be stronger and more vibrant than ever, but they will be more intelligently directed. And so this will be the great part about the Aquarian age. And it makes you wonder, when you look at the world, how much we are into the realm of mind, when you see how people are affected so much emotionally still, and often follow an illogical path. So we've still got a lot of work to do to make the mind dominant. But can you imagine, like 200 years from now, when the mind does dominate over the emotions? how much the world could be improved. And right now, there's a big conflict between the emotion and the mind. And it's producing all the political conflict we see, all the religious conflict. It's always comes down to emotion versus mind. When you see two people arguing, maybe they're both centered a lot on the emotion, but there's always one that's a little bit more gravitated to the mind than the other. In any argument, in any conflict you see, there's always one side that's a little bit more on mind. And overall, the mind slightly is dominating, very slightly right now, and it will increase. And I'm really looking forward to the increase in the next 100 years or so. But we're at kind of a transition period right now, that we're at a point of tension where the conflict between the Piscean energies and the Aquarian energies are in interplay, and it's just a matter of time before the mind dominates, but it doesn't look very apparent from where we're at right now.
The highest form of emotion is divine love wisdom, which is emergence with the mind. Divine love wisdom.
Yeah, the great part about the heart center is dominated by love, wisdom, and wisdom stimulates mind energies. And I like the introduction of DK to all of his works. He talks about the masters are contacted on the plane of the mind, the plane where the masters can be found. Okay, any other comments before we move on here?
Yeah, I think this coronavirus has just been introduced so that people can separate from the emotional, fear-based emotion into the higher mind. If you use logic, the chances of any of us getting this virus are slim. And even if we did, the chances of any of us dying from it are very slim.
Yeah, it's interesting. When you listen to the media, it sounds, the media is like Piscean age authorities, kind of. They're like trying to scare the dickens out of everybody. But when you talk to individuals, the individuals I talk to are a lot more mental than the media. They say, yeah, you know, there's chances again that aren't that great. And most people I actually talk to see it with much more mental facility than the media does. Have you guys noticed that yourself?
Well, the media has to sell their products, and they have to sell their medicines and all this crap.
Yeah, yeah. But
if it wasn't for the media, no one would be afraid at all.
You think the average person would be afraid to shake anybody's hand or anything, but most average people are a lot more into the Aquarian mind than the media, Hollywood, the politicians, everybody else that's trying to tell us what to do. But it seemed like you take the average construction worker out there that the media thinks is kind of low life. He's got a lot more common sense in dealing with this type of thing than the people in charge do, which is kind of interesting.
Hey, what's going on with all this panic buying of toilet paper?
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, I just read that somebody Walmart in Utah pulled a gun on somebody because they were fighting over toothpaste. The last tube of toothpaste on the shelf. Somebody pulled a gun on somebody else.
That's another good reason for being in these chat rooms. Nobody ever caught a virus in a chat group.
Yeah, right. Well, that's one great part about the internet. Imagine if we didn't have the internet and we had this virus and you couldn't go out of your house, or people were afraid to go out of your house. Boy, everybody would be really lonely, but at least we got the internet. So even if they quarantine everybody, we can still get together. So, you know, unless the internet were to go down. Okay. He says, so the Aquarian influences began in 1640 and increases since. He says and these Aquarian influences are doing several things. It's breaking down the crystallized forms of the Piscean age. So that all these forms that trying to hold together the old age, and it's like, it's like if you build a structure, you want the structure to hold up as long as possible. And so the Piscean age structures are all built up to hold as long as possible. And when they've served their purpose and it's time to bulldoze them over, they don't want to go. But the Aquarian energies are breaking them down. And he says, the Aquarian energies are stimulating creative faculties as they express themselves in group concepts and group plans. Okay, yeah, there's been a lot of more creativity since 1640, even in writings, fiction, nonfiction, information, inventions. Creativity has been breaking down the structures of the old age, paving the way for the new.
And 1875 was a very important part in this new age with the beginning of the Theosophical movement.
Yeah, that was an important thing. There's been a number of milestones. The Constitution of the United States, the creation of that, a more free society, freedom, the establishment of the principle of freedom was extremely key. The appearance of greater light. There's been a number of avatars and disciples manifesting higher light, higher teachings. Madame Blavatsky, Alice A. Bailey, Science of Mind, Joseph Smith. Many teachers have come and gone to help stimulate the new age.
And the Lord of the world and the Spirit of the earth have to use these natural forces like these diseases and these tidal waves and these tsunamis where humanity wouldn't make changes on their own.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the Tibetan told us that if World War II had not happened, do you know what would have happened? Does anyone remember reading that what he said would happen if World War II hadn't happened? He said we would have had at least as many deaths as World War II had produced. If we had maintained peace, what would have happened, he said, would have been a tremendous plague that would have wiped out at least as many people as happened in World War II. But we didn't have to have a plague because we had World War II that took care that did the same thing.
Technology that came out of World War II.
Yeah,
yeah. You know, everything from nuclear energy, all the energy sources were developed and maintained. And
so yeah, so mass karmic balance.
So what I'm thinking of here is that maybe we're approaching another time where we have avoided World War III so far. So instead of a war, maybe we're going to have some type of maybe a virus or something like this. This virus doesn't seem bad enough that it's going to destroy that many people, but you never know.
Not like the Black Plague.
The chances are we'll get it under control and it'll be something that will pass with, there'll be a certain amount of deaths, of course, but how bad it will be is to be seen.
The Lord of civilization has to balance all the forces that are in play, including the force of the human mind, and the forces of nature all work in balance.
Yeah. He says these changes are manifest in individuals merging into groups and seeking the group good. This is illustrated in the words of Spock, who said, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. He gave 3 words here that sound the keynote of what disciples are supposed to soak in about bringing the new age. The first word is impersonalization. In other words, the individual focuses on the group good above his own. The second is amalgamation, where the individual sees himself as part of the greater life or the group. The word synthesis also is in harmony with this. We must synthesize everything together, but to see yourself as part of the group. Now, the trouble with people seeking self-interest is they don't see themselves as part of a greater whole. Once you see yourself as part of a greater whole, then working for the group is like working for yourself. Like all the cells in your body, the cells in your body see themselves as a part of the body. Instead of saying, I am a cell, they say, I am JJ or whatever. That's their consciousness, and thus they work for the good of the whole body, and realizing it also works for the good of them as a cell within the body. Intercommunication is a third key word. Communication with other groups and individuals to further the group and individual goals. Okay, so we must make our communications as broad as possible and our outreach as far as possible. And even though we may have a group that we really like and we love each other and we seek the group good, we want to extend ourselves so that we can produce the maximum interplay, the maximum benefit to the whole, to as far as we can outreach. Now you have to use common sense in all this. For instance, as an individual, you have to use common sense to be able to make enough money, supply your own needs, and take care of your health and stuff like that. You have to apply a certain amount of attention to yourself above everything else, or else you won't be even useful. So as a cell in the greater body, we have to apply a certain amount of attention to the part. But once the part is taken care of, then the attention has to go outward to the group. And then when you can do what you can for the group, then we look outside of the group to other groups, and eventually to the whole world. And this is where the disciples' attention needs to settle, is if it comes down to a deciding point, to where you can do something that benefits the whole world. I mean, that would be where the important point of where the attention can settle, if it is possible to participate in something that will benefit there. Like, say, just for instance, the average person, he goes and votes. He votes for the candidate. The disciple will vote for the candidate that he thinks will be best for everything, not just himself, but for the whole, maybe just not for his country, maybe not for his state, but for the whole world. Okay. And this is sadly lacking to a great degree. Now consider how much change has occurred in the past 500 years, from each person only concerned about his own family and little means of outreach, to the communication and intercommunication we have today. Now, he wrote this in 1934. Now, imagine him writing this in 34 and thinking, boy, look how much progress we made since 1640. We've back in 1640, the average person had his little family, and he was mainly concerned with survival, and he didn't have much outreach or group activity at all. But today that is in 1934 was magnified a lot. But then think of how much progress we've made since 1934 in communication. I mean, they had no internet back then. They had radio. FDR was given his fireside chats, and everybody thought that was really innovative thing that he was bringing the whole country in and kind of having a little chat with them on the radio. Everybody thought that was really high tech and innovative, and it was at the time. But just think how far we've come since then.
Yeah, they had telephone, telegraph, and telewoman.
Yeah, right. What we're doing right now at this moment was just a dream a few years ago, that we can get together and have a meeting like almost as good as if you guys are right there in front of me in my room right here. It's almost like you're here. And so this is like a dream come true. And what we need to do as disciples is make the best of it, because we have all this intercommunication technology available. And unfortunately, it's a lot of it's misused. A lot of people just on their phones all day, just talking about dribble, and or on Facebook, and they're just talking about what they ate for breakfast or stuff like that. And a lot of the stuff that use of this miracle of communication we have is to communicate things that don't mean anything to anybody. Instead, the disciples of the world need to focus on communicating things that are important, things that bring people together, things that solidify the power of love and light, and bring the consciousness of people up higher. We have the tools, but tools can always be used for positive or negative, and the tools of the internet are used for both. So let us not be the guy that just walking along and not so engrossed in talking about mundane things that he gets run over by a car because he's not paying attention. Pay attention and focus on moving forward in light and knowledge and usefulness, rather than just being entertained. And so the problem with the technology we have, it's used so much more for entertainment than to move things ahead and make life better. Certain amount of entertainment is good. We need it. That's what the Sabbath is for. Say 1 day out of 7 is to do something different, to relax, to unwind. We need that. We need a certain amount of entertainment, but we don't need to be entertained all the time. We need to spend 6 out of 7 time periods in focusing on important work to be done. Okay, students need to ask themselves, are they wasting time in mystical dreams, or are they occupied in a practical application of the sense spiritual truths, thus making them part of their daily experience? Second question, do they resist impersonality, detachment, and being the observer, or can they use this to solve their personal problems? Okay, being the observer, he stresses this time and time again, how important being the observer is. And being the observer can help you actually solve your personal problems. Because when we have problems, we identify too much with them. We need to step back, be the observer, and as an observer, you can figure out solutions. Can they register an increasing ability to sense the thoughts and ideas of others and becoming more sensitive? Becoming more sensitive can be negative or positive. We don't want to become more sensitive to people offending us, because many people are way, way, way too sensitive to taking offense. It's really easy to do. But we need to be more sensitive to people's feelings, people's hearts, people's problems. Okay, fourth, he says, is the seeker being a drama queen, thinking that everything revolves around him or her? Or are they decentralizing themselves and merging into the whole? Yeah, the drama queen. How many drama queens do we meet in life? Everything like centered around them. Now, this is something that has to be ironed off over a period of lifetimes for each of us, because for each of us, we're the center of our own universe. And that's good and bad to realize. It's good to realize in the fact that we realize that the buck stops at our consciousness, because we're in charge of producing a world that we can be happy to live in. But on the other hand, if we see ourselves as more important than everybody else, then that produces a problem. We're the center of our universe, but everybody else is the center of their universe also. And so we need to see ourselves as a center that is a cell mixed with many other cells, producing a group life, and everybody has an important part to play. Okay, any comments on that? As part of the purpose of these instructions is to guide the spiritual workers through the interlude between the ages. We're shifting from separative thinking to group thinking, and for that which benefits the whole rather than the part. All that impedes this must be swept away. So we're in the interlude between the ages, and in the interlude between the ages, as he points out several times that points of tension arise, and these points of tension can be manifest, like World War II was a great point of tension, and now we're at another point of tension. We may be entering a time there may be a great plague, or just maybe the great plague will actually be just a plague of fear more than anything else. Who knows? But we don't know everything that will happen. The hierarchy itself doesn't know everything that's going to happen, because we have free will, and humanity sometimes makes unpredictable decisions as a whole. So it's going to be interesting. The next week will be interesting to see. It'll tell us something about where we're headed with this virus. So that's going to be interesting. And the next 6 months is going to be very pivotal about the direction that we're going. So next week when we meet, let's hope that the world's still holding up and everybody's well and healthy.
Humanity is like you herding cats sometimes.
Yeah.
They try to herd cats.
Yeah, it's interesting to look at the difference in the consciousness of a cat and a dog. It's so different, but they're both lovable animals.
I like to see the operating principle that lies behind the happenings of what appears. And we're told to see the love that lies behind the happenings of the day.
Yeah, right. See the love that lies behind the happenings of the times. That's good. And it's kind of hard to see sometimes, like during World War II, it was really hard to see, but you know, a lot of the pressures that they experienced in World War II produced a lot of camaraderie and love and unity among people that held together.
And heroes. A lot of people rose to the top that wouldn't have otherwise been observed or noticed. They, you know, they had to excel in times of high stress.
Yeah, it's too bad that we have to undergo such stress and turbulence sometimes to bring out the best in us.
That war was necessary to wipe out a lot of ancient evil.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think the next week we'll have some interesting observations to take in. So until then, we will sign off and I hope everyone has a good week despite all the fear-based news in the media out there.
It'll be as good as we think it is.
I had been commenting as much as 20 years ago that within my lifetime, rather than religion, it would be science that proves there's a God. And I've seen some videos in the last couple of weeks, like, man, these guys are really going to do it. They're talking about there couldn't have been a Big Bang unless there was something that caused that to happen mentally.
Right, right. And that's something science hasn't been able to explain. Well, what in the world caused that Big Bang?
I know. They're beginning to say, yeah, there had to be a God. You know,
read The Secret Doctrine.
Yeah.
Yeah. And remember that your soul does not experience fear. So if you're soul-based, you won't worry about things.
I read The Secret Doctrine, and boy, you talk about somebody that's hard to get into.
Yeah, that's really, really a complex thing to read. I'm reading it through again right now, and I got to admire Blavatsky, though, for she had a vocabulary and a grasp of facts that was almost supernatural.
Yeah, the hardest thing for me was that the top of every other page, she was defending her viewpoint against the people who were calling her a heretic or whatever. So she was constantly on the defense in her writings.
Yeah, she's not very easy reading, but boy, she sure had a grasp of information. It was amazing what she come up with.
Yeah, and follow it up by a treatise on cosmic fire.
Yeah, yeah, that's actually easy reading compared to hers. But okay, my friends, really a good group today, and appreciate you being here. And we will see you next week, next Sunday at 2 p.m. All being well.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, JJ.
Thanks, JJ. Bye, everybody. Have a good week.
Guys.
See you next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Life and
Bye.
love, everybody.